Hey y'all, they call me Silver. You can find me on Instagram at Trail Won't Hike Itself. I've been through hiking for the last 2 years, but thanks to this little apocalypse we've got going on, I am grounded back home in Kennebunkport. Now, thanks to through hiking, I've got friends all over the world, and I really have a hard time conveying to them the complexity or quaintness or aggressive weirdness that is the towns where I was born. So I thought I'd make this little video of me wandering around with a camera, showing off the glories of the bunks. Here it is. So just to get you situated, here is the old homestead, hard by the river, right near the sea. This is Kennebunkport and Kennebunk and Arundel, which is in York County, Maine, which is a state in the United States, which is on this blue marble someone's kicking around. This is the view from Kennebunkport Bridge, the heart of everything, and just up the road from where I grew up. And I think it's a really great window into the varieties of Kennebunks that are in Kennebunk. For example, floating on the water right now, we have active lobster boats, part of the working waterfront. And we also have these ridiculous yachts, many of which are all mothballed up for the winter. I don't know what the actual nautical term is. Shut up. And Kennebunkport is a weird place in the best of circumstances, even when there's not a global pandemic going on. Right here, you've got one of my favorite signs in Kennebunkport, which is honor system parking, that quaint old New England Puritan kind of ideal, but the parking's still $3 an hour. God damn it. Or here you have some of the aggressively vineyard vinesy buildings that are in Dock Square, Kennebunkport, and this is just what I grew up with. This is my sort of definition of normal. And although the restaurants here are closed right now due to the quarantine, it's not like they'd be, seeing a lot of foot traffic in late March anyway. In my travels in America, I've noticed that most cities and most places are pretty spread out. It's really mostly New England where things are clumped together like this, like it's most of Europe, and that's really set my perspective on a lot of the world and a lot of my travels. It's no surprise, I think, looking at these pictures, why when I went to the Netherlands, I felt right at home, and when I went to Venice, I felt like I was in a much nicer version of my home. Despite the fact that the winter population of this area is a few thousand people, and the summertime population is like the friggin' Rose Bowl on every weekend, this is still a full year-round town with a year-round population. It's a quiet place in the winter, but it's where I grew up. We've got all the essential services, by which I mean we have a library. And churches. This is Puritan country. We have what I would charitably describe as a lot of motherfucking churches. There's a lot of businesses in the area, mostly lobster restaurants and whatnot, and I'm honestly not sure how many of them are going to be surviving the pandemic. But on the off chance that things change a lot over the next year, most of these businesses aren't here, at least let this serve as kind of a time capsule to before the plague. So I think it's time that I hop in the old vroom vroom machine, note the humble bragging bumper stickers, and go on a little driving tour of the Kennebunks. Seriously, even by off-season standards, this place is creepily empty. And I mean, it's to be understood, but it's still really freaky, man. Most tourists, I think, they think of Kennebunkport as the beach. But to me, a lot of this town is the space between the beach and the inland, this estuary in Kennebunkport with all these creeping little creeks and mini fjords rolling up into old buildings and rich people's houses. Everyone who's seen Jaws, raise their hand. This is the so-called beach wall, where I transacted approximately 100% of my youthful social life, and it's still my favorite place in the world. And I just wanted to say that the tide right now was higher than I had ever seen it in my entire life, which I'm sure has absolutely no bearing on the future of beach communities across the world. None at all. Some of the houses down by the beach are very old New England, and they look either, I don't know, Stephen King murdery or Lovecraft murdery, mostly depending on the ambient lighting. Whereas some of the houses are, they're still New Englandy, but they're definitely the Vineyard Vines kind of New Englandy, which is to say they look like South Beach with lobster delivery. I'm not sure which is more New England, a classically almost British country-style house that is surrounded by literally dozens of no parking signs, or a house that probably cost $1,000 when it was purchased in 1930 and now is worth $500,000. While there's not a lot of modern architecture in this area, what there is a lot of is people who buy old houses and then paint them gray. And then you have places which advertise old businesses, and I don't know if they're old like colonial era old or old like 1960s, someone who went to Yale and majored in poetry old. But one thing I can tell you is they are affectations. Another common trope you'll see is American flags on barns. I expect this has mostly to do with like design magazines that people have read, or Canadians trying to remind themselves which side of the border they're on. This is the White Barn Inn, a Michelin star restaurant and the nicest restaurant, I think like north of Boston, really. I grew up in the shadow of this restaurant, and it meant a whole lot to me when my mother and I finally got it together to go. The meal lasted for 4 hours. It was absolutely delightful. And this here is Pier 77, which is the other extreme of fine Maine dining. I don't know if you've noticed, but they have buoys. The first of these is a recently built farmhouse, and probably the closest thing that there is in the area to real modern architecture. And then here is one of the oldest farms in the area, which the locals call the Clock Farm, for reasons passing understanding. This is the Colony Hotel, which was a summer artists' colony back in the day and one of the grand hotels of New England. Still serves a mean Sunday brunch, or it does when the world isn't shut down. And this is one of the houses right next door to it, which I would describe as a McMansion! Hooray! This is a farm stand where I'd go to buy veggies and dilly beans growing up. I love the Airstream next to it. But not as much as I love the house from the colonial era, which has solar panels on the roof. Top score, guys. And this is a recently built cottage. You can tell because all the old New England stuff is not this aggressively quaint. And this dude could very easily be some crazy old mana, but I think more likely is a, like, millionaire retired lawyer with a sign collection. Although, either way, he definitely cures rad sickness for bottle caps. As we move into Kennebunk proper, which is the inland town, usually the houses are either much bigger or better maintained. Sometimes both, but often not. The bigger houses particularly were owned by the shipbuilders and the shipping captains back in the 18th and 19th centuries, and some of them are real big, and those ones usually gave out the biggest chocolate bars at Halloween, so they're my favorites. When I was growing up here 30 years ago, a lot of these houses were just owned by regular people in the community. This is what there was to rent and own. I have a sneaking suspicion that they cost a bit more money now and are mostly summer homes or yuppie residences for people who work in Boston. This house is made out of wood, but is made to look like it's made out of stone, which is a very old New England thing. Look, they've got a flag! And this house is, like, probably honestly why I grew up liking fantasy novels, because this thing just existed. Jesus. This is the Kennebunk Free Library, where I would get and then read those fantasy novels. It's been closed for over a month now because of the quarantine, but you can park behind it and steal their Wi-Fi if you want. So if I've Skyped with you over the last few weeks, that's probably where I've been. The great thing about these old towns is how close everything is together. Like, this is 1 block away from all those big houses, and this house, I named the photo that I took Murder House. Class distinctions were very sharp back in the day. This is where I went to primary school. It's been converted into senior living apartments, but that's fine because before it was converted into a public school, it was a prison. They made license plates here. This is like 1 block from downtown Kennebunk. It was owned by this guy, it's kind of crazy guy, who collected houses. This is one that was too big for him to move, but he had like a dozen, including like a church and a train station, which he would buy and then have moved to his apartment and just throw it in the backyard. Yeah, his wife loved that. And he was also an antiques collector, and his wife was an optometrist. So I would go to her and get my pupils dilated, and then when I would leave, it would be through this incredibly cluttered museum of like scrimshaw and old weapons. And when your pupils are dilated, that stuff looks so cool. Here's the farm where I learned to horseback ride. I would walk over, ride horses, and then walk home. Maine! This right here is a pretty normal American-looking red barn. I'm pretty sure that if you started going west, you'd just basically see more of these until you hit the Rockies. So there's that. And here's a view of some of the salt marshes. This is a little bit outside of town, but it's just one of my favorite places in the world. I just love sitting there or going down to Lodholm Farm and looking at views like this. It's like the Maine that was before the tourists was, before we were here, and it's really very nice, actually. And finally, the old homestead. We've only been here for a little while, but let me tell you, having a little bit of a backyard and a river access during this time of troubles, it does not suck. So this is where I'm from. This is the Kennebunks. It was a fine and dandy place to grow up in. We didn't lock our doors at night. I used to walk to school on a bridle path, which in retrospect kind of foreshadows my life as a thru hiker. It's a beautiful town to spend some time in. I kind of wish I was back on trail right now, but they're a worse place to spend a quarantine. And since you made it this far, here, have Lighthouse.